next guest on the program, Greens leader Richard Di Natale, joining us in our Melbourne studio. Senator, thanks for your time. Now, you're the, leader of the party that was confirmed yesterday. Were there any challenges for the role?
No, uncontested, all positions. So Adam Bandt being re-elected as deputy leader along with Senator Larissa Waters and Rachel Siewert as party whip.
Right, and when you look at where you're placed right now, you did just hold on to all of the Senate seats, but no progress in the lower house. How would you rate the Greens' performance?
Oh, well, before the election, people were writing us off and we had 6 Senate spots up for election. We had 6 senators re-elected. We had big swings to us. I mean, in places like South Australia, we almost saw the vote double there. We had big swings in South Australia and Queensland, big swing in the Senate right across the country, and the lower house vote stable. We've made seats like Kooyong and Higgins are now marginal seats. These are traditionally blue ribbon, safe seats that belong to prime ministers and treasurers. They're now marginal seats. Look, in the face of what was a campaign run by huge coal interests, we saw the Greens vote increase. And so it was a very strong result. If we repeat this result in a few years' time, if we repeat this result in 2022, we'll see an extra 3 senators return and we'll see the Greens with sole balance of power in the Senate based on these numbers.
What's not appearing to happen, though, in terms of tracking is what you said would happen in 2016, 20% of the vote within a decade. Does that feel achievable still?
Oh, absolutely. And what you've seen, for example, in Germany was the vote of the Greens, which had been consistently on around 10% for a number of years. You saw a big spike in that vote occur over the last year or two. It's happened very quickly. It's happened in the face of inaction on climate change. It's happened in the face of the rise of the far right, where the Greens have been the strongest, most powerful voice of opposition. It's happened in the face of the Greens showing themselves to be an alternative government.
But here in that same time frame, we've got an election that was framed as a climate change election, and yet not a big spike for the Greens when we look at that lower house, and a push towards the coalition in a broad sense. So
not a push towards the coalition. What we're seeing is the trend that has happened over the last 3 decades continue. You're seeing nationally a decrease in support for both major parties. You're seeing an increase in the vote for third parties and independents. That trend continues. It shows no sign of changing. And so, yes, very confident about the Greens as climate change continues to become a more important issue. It is the single defining issue of our generation. We've got to address this. We're facing the breakdown of our climate, the loss of the Barrier Reef, the collapse of the Murray-Darling, more fires, more floods. Every election from this point on will be a climate election. So I'm very confident about the foundations that we've laid, and you will see the Greens continue to go from strength to strength.
Do you think, though, your message on climate is proving to be the electoral success you thought it was going to be?
Oh, well, in Queensland, where climate was front and centre, you saw an increase in the vote for the Greens. Indeed, in some of those communities where the Adani mine was contested, you're seeing an increase in support for the Greens. What's happening
but wasn't that was really marginal by the end for a lot of those seats, wasn't it? When you look at the way those seats went, they went to the coalition away from Labor.
Yes, on the back of One Nation preferences, it needs to be said, and Clive Palmer. So let's again be very clear about that.
But those voters were hardly saying go Greens, were they?
No, but what we did see was an increase in support for the Greens in those seats. And unfortunately, what we had during the election campaign was, on one hand, the government proposing full steam ahead on the Adani mine, and on the other hand, the opposition were giving mixed messages. So there wasn't a real contest. Indeed, people saw through, a party that said one thing in Queensland and another thing in Victoria, for example. There wasn't a clear choice. Now, the challenge for all of us on the progressive side of politics is working together, working with the community to really highlight that making the transition away from coal to renewables is a jobs-rich transition, and it's indeed a transition that brings investment and long-term certainty to those communities, because coal is at a dead end. What we're really arguing about is the timetable for the closure of these coal mines and coal-fired power stations. No one's suggesting that coal has any long-term future. So our challenge is to make it very clear that what we're proposing is jobs-rich, investment-rich, and it's a long-term future for those communities.
Just on that, though, figures out today suggest there's a bigger increase to coal than had been anticipated. When you look at emissions overall, Australia's emissions have been increasing, and we always talk to the Minister about that when he's on, but the rest of the world going at double the rate of increase compared to Australia. When we look at the Paris target and people concerned we're going to get nowhere near it, Australia's really not the big issue here, is it?
There's no question that as a global community we need to do better. There are many countries, some of our biggest coal export markets, Japan and South Korea, making it very clear that they want to move to a hydrogen-based economy. Big opportunities for us if we transition away from coal to clean hydrogen. We can be exporting renewable energy to the world. Some very interesting renewable projects in northwest WA where we could be again exporting solar and wind power to the rest of the world. We have big opportunities here, but we do know that the market is moving in one direction, and that's away from coal to renewables. We're building renewable capacity.
Globally, that's not true in a global sense across the board, is it? We're getting coal use actually spiking just at the moment.
But what we're seeing over the long term are many companies making investment decisions that make it crystal clear that coal does not have a long-term future. And indeed, Glencore talked about capping their production of coal, thermal coal, and we are seeing right around the world nations move away from coal to renewables. Right. China, for example, is building more renewable capacity. There's a renewable energy revolution going on in China right now, and that's where the long-term future for Australia lies, creating jobs, investment and certainty.
I want to ask very quickly as well, you're down there in Melbourne, of course, a lot of talk about fans and how vociferous they're being. We don't have much time, but can I get your thoughts quickly on if the AFL's being a bit heavy-handed?
Oh, look, I think it's a really important conversation. I remember as a young kid playing VFA footy, having the abuse hurled at me, sometimes, being reminded about my ethnic origins. It was a pretty consistent thing, just sitting in the outer and watching games of footy and the abuse that was hurled, often racist abuse. It's a good thing and long overdue that we're having a conversation about how we can be more respectful at the footy. That doesn't mean you can't, shout and, support your team and, occasionally be the opposition team. But, having been to see the Adam Goodes documentary only a few days ago, what it does highlight is that we are, as a community, having a conversation about how we can go and support our team and do it respectfully, doing it in a way that actually supports some of the great people who are competing on the stage and giving us so much great entertainment.
Yeah.